If you think betrayal cuts deepest between enemies, you're wrong. It's the ones you've fed, loved, and sacrificed for who can slice you open without warning. Last Christmas, I stood outside my only son's house, snow biting through my coat, hearing my daughter-in-law laugh inside with her glittering friends. She had just called me a shameless woman and told me Christmas wasn't for me. She didn't know that humiliation would be her undoing. She didn't know I held the keys to every dollar that kept her pretty world afloat. Snow blanketed Lincoln, Nebraska, in soft silence that night, but inside my chest a storm raged. For 62 years, I'd believed Christmas was about family, forgiveness, and holding close what little the world hadn't already taken from me. Henry's death on the icy interstate the night our son John was born had stolen nearly everything: my partner, my security, my dreams of a bustling household. All I had left was John, the miracle I'd raised alone. When Camilla came into our lives, I dared to believe God was giving me a daughter. She was sweet, with a honeyed voice and polite questions about my late husband. She'd drop off pecan pie unasked, call me Mom, and make John promise weekly dinners with me. I had no reason to doubt her. She fooled me completely. Now, through the frosted windows of their suburban mansion, I saw John laughing, champagne glass in hand, surrounded by people in glittering dresses. The tree glowed like something from a magazine. And me. I stood outside like an uninvited ghost, clutching a tin of Henry's favorite ginger cookies that suddenly felt ridiculous in my numb fingers. It hadn't started this way. 2 weeks earlier, I'd phoned Camilla, asking what time I should arrive for Christmas. There had been a pause, long enough for my stomach to twist. About Christmas, she'd said, her voice sugar-coated but brittle. It's really just a younger crowd this year, John's work friends. You know how awkward it can be when energy doesn't match. Maybe we'll do something with you another time? Another time? I'd whispered. Her laugh was sharp, fake. It's not personal, Margaret. Christmas isn't really for, well, elderly people. You understand. But I didn't. And I couldn't accept it. So here I was, standing on her doorstep on Christmas Eve, the smell of mulled wine drifting out each time the door opened for a guest. I rang the bell. Camilla opened the door, her sequined dress catching the light. Behind her, the party noise softened as people turned their heads. Her polite mask slipped. Margaret, she said quickly, stepping outside and pulling the door nearly shut behind her. I thought we discussed this. I just wanted to drop these off. I held up the cookies, my voice cracking. Her smile hardened into something cruel. Get out. Christmas is not for you, you shameless woman. The words echoed in the cold night air. Shameless. As if loving my son, as if showing up for him, was shameful. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I walked back through the snow, each crunch under my boots sealing something inside me. I drove home on autopilot, headlights blurring through tears. In my warm but lonely farmhouse, I stared at the old family photo on the mantel. Henry, younger than John was now, grinning with his arm around me. Beneath it, the folder containing every financial account I'd built for John rested in my desk drawer. Investments. Trust funds. Joint accounts. Every cent of security my late husband and I had sweated for. All of it is still under my name. As I sipped a glass of Merlot, a flicker of anger sharpened into resolve. Camilla had mistaken my kindness for weakness. She thought I was expendable, a relic. But Henry had taught me something in our trucking business. Never hand someone the keys to your kingdom without keeping a spare. At 11:15 p.m., I logged into my laptop. My fingers moved steadily, guided by decades of bookkeeping. One by one, I froze every account tied to John's name. The 7-figure brokerage account. Locked. The credit cards. Suspended. The cash flow for their mortgage. Cut off. I even flagged the savings account Camilla had been using for her boutique shopping sprees. At 11:47, my phone rang. Mom. John's voice was panicked, a little slurred. Our card just got declined at the restaurant after the party. What's going on? I kept my tone even. You might want to ask your wife why she thought Christmas wasn't for me. Mom, don't. Click. The calls multiplied. Camilla left a tearful voicemail. Margaret, please, this is a misunderstanding. Diane, her mother, barked into the phone. "How dare you embarrass my daughter like this? Do you know what you've done?" But as the snow piled higher outside my window, I felt a strange calm. For the first time in years, I wasn't invisible. What they didn't know was that freezing the accounts was just the beginning. In the weeks leading up to Christmas, I'd seen enough suspicious transfers and hushed conversations to sense something rotten beneath their polished lives. Camilla wasn't just cruel, she was hiding something. And Diane? Her desperation for appearances hinted at debts no one was supposed to see. Tonight, they had written me off as irrelevant. But by tomorrow, they'd remember exactly who I was. If this opening has you gripping your seat, just wait, the secrets Camilla and Diane are hiding will leave you speechless. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and drop a comment below about what you'd do in Margaret's place. The storm of revenge has only begun. Revenge isn't always loud. Sometimes it's silent keystrokes on a winter night, a quiet freeze on the lifeline your enemies didn't know you controlled. When I hit confirm to lock my son's accounts, I wasn't just taking their money, I was taking back my dignity. And I knew their perfect little world was about to crumble. The morning after Christmas, the phone rang again before dawn. My farmhouse was wrapped in grey light, the snow outside like a frozen ocean. I let it ring 4 times before picking up. "Mom," John said, his voice tight. "The bank's saying our accounts are frozen. All of them. Mortgage, credit cards, everything." I sipped my coffee. "Yes, that's right. You can't do that. It's our money. Our money." My voice stayed calm, but my hands trembled. "Henry and I built that money. I kept it safe for you. But after what happened last night, I see I made a mistake trusting Camilla." There was a pause. I could almost hear him blinking, blindsided. "She didn't mean it like that. She gets nervous hosting. It wasn't personal. Calling me a shameless woman isn't personal?" I asked. "Humiliating me on Christmas Eve isn't personal?" Another pause. Then a sigh. "Please, Mom. Just unlock it. We'll talk later." I hung up. An hour later, Camilla called, her voice syrupy with forced sweetness. "Margaret, I was out of line last night. I'm so sorry. The wine, the stress." "You meant every word," I said, interrupting her. Her tone sharpened. "This isn't fair. John's company has payroll due. Freezing the accounts hurts him, not just me." "You should have thought about that before you shut me out," I replied. After I ended the call, I stared at Henry's photo on the mantel. I could almost hear his voice. "Don't back down when you're right, Maggie." Later that day, my phone buzzed with a message from Elaine, my friend at First Lincoln Bank. "Elaine, saw the freeze request. Just a heads up, there have been odd transfers from John's business account. Large ones. You might want to check." Odd transfers. My stomach dropped. I pulled up the online records and scrolled through line after line of payments, luxury boutiques, high-end furniture stores, but also something worse, wire transfers to a Houston-based consulting firm I'd never heard of. Nearly $75,000 had vanished over the last 6 months. Henry had always warned me, money leaves a trail. I called Elaine back. "Can you find out more about those transfers?" She hesitated. "I could get in trouble for digging, but, for you, Maggie, I'll see what I can do." The snow thickened outside, winds whistling through the eaves. I sat at my desk, unease gnawing at me. Camilla's insult had been cruel, yes, but what if it wasn't just arrogance? What if it was desperation? By late afternoon, John appeared at my doorstep. He didn't knock softly, he pounded. I opened the door to find him flushed, still in his designer coat. "You went too far," he snapped. I stepped aside. "Come in before you freeze." He stomped snow from his boots, glaring at me. "Do you realize what you've done? Camilla's humiliated, payroll's stalled, and the mortgage payment bounces Monday." I set a mug of coffee in front of him at the kitchen table. "Sit. And tell me why $75,000 was wired to a company in Houston." His face drained of color. How do you know about that?" "You forget who set up these accounts," I said. "It's complicated." "Then uncomplicate it," I said firmly. He rubbed his temples. Camilla said it was an investment opportunity her mother found. Something about property development. Diane. Of course. My jaw tightened. And you just agreed? Without checking? Mom, she's my wife. I trusted her. I shook my head. Trust shouldn't be blind. For a moment, his confident veneer cracked, and I saw the boy I'd raised, the boy who used to bring me dandelions as if they were roses. Please, he whispered. I can't lose my company over this. Just unlock the accounts. Not until I know what's really going on, I said. He pushed back his chair, frustrated. You're punishing me for Camilla's mistake. I stayed silent. Sometimes silence cuts deeper than words. When he left, slamming the door, I felt a pang of guilt. But beneath it burned something stronger, determination. They had underestimated me. They thought I was some sentimental, aging woman too scared to stand up for herself. They were wrong. That night, Elaine texted again, those Houston transfers? The consulting firm dissolved 2 months ago. Looks like a shell company. Be careful, Maggie. A shell company. Fraud. My hands shook, not from fear, but from clarity. Camilla and Diane weren't just cruel, they were scheming. I poured a second glass of wine and opened an old photo album. Henry and I at the trucking yard. John at 5 years old, grinning with missing teeth. The memory of Henry's voice came again, calm and steady. Protect what's yours. The phone rang once more. This time I didn't answer. Let them sweat. Out the window, the snow stopped, leaving the world frozen and still like the accounts that now held their perfect lives hostage. And for the first time in years, I felt powerful. What would you do if someone you trusted insulted you and hid a secret this big? The storm is just gathering. Subscribe, like, and leave a comment below about whether Margaret should keep the accounts locked or go even further. Chapter 3 will reveal just how deep this betrayal goes. People say blood is thicker than water, but sometimes loyalty thins out faster than melting snow. My son thought my silence meant surrender. He didn't know that every memory of sacrifice, every sleepless night I'd endured for him, was fuel for the fire he and Camilla had lit. By the time dawn broke after freezing those accounts, the illusions holding our family together had already begun to shatter. 2 days after Christmas, I woke to a world wrapped in white silence. The farmhouse creaked under the weight of the snow, and the air smelled of wood smoke and frost. But peace eluded me. My phone was still full of unanswered calls and frantic voicemails, John begging, Camilla sobbing, Diane threatening. I hadn't replied to a single one. I brewed coffee and sat by the window, watching a red cardinal flit across the yard. Cardinals always reminded me of Henry, stubborn survivors in the coldest winters. A knock rattled the front door. I didn't need to check to know who it was. John stood on my porch again, eyes shadowed with exhaustion, snow dusting his coat. But this time, he wasn't angry, he looked lost. Mom, he said quietly, stepping inside. You're back, I replied, setting down my mug. He glanced at the family photos lining the hallway, photos of birthdays, fishing trips, and Christmas mornings before Camilla ever existed. We need to talk, he said. Then talk. He rubbed his neck, hesitating. I know you're hurt. Camilla, she can be impulsive. But she loves me. She just felt judged. I raised an eyebrow. Judged? For excluding me on Christmas? I'm not defending her words, he said quickly. But freezing the accounts, it's hurting my employees. The mortgage is bouncing. I can't pay vendors. I leaned forward. And $75,000 disappearing into a dissolved company isn't hurting anyone? His face paled again. I'm looking into it. You should have looked before you wired the money, I said. Do you even know Diane's real financial situation? He frowned. She's wealthy. She's in debt, I said flatly. And now she's using you to clean it up. John sat heavily at the table, the same table where he'd done his homework while I cooked after long shifts. I don't know what to do, he admitted. Camilla keeps saying it'll all work out. But things aren't adding up. I softened, just a little. He was my son, after all. But the image of Camilla smirking while partygoers whispered on Christmas Eve burned in my mind. John, I said gently, Do you remember the year you wanted to quit baseball because your coach benched you? He blinked. Yeah. Henry told you, don't let anyone sideline you from what's yours. You stuck it out. And you hit the game-winning run. His shoulders slumped. I miss him. So do I whispered. And he wouldn't want you to be blind. A long silence stretched between us, broken only by the ticking clock. Finally, he stood. Will you, at least consider unfreezing the accounts? Just for payroll? I met his eyes. When I know the truth. Not before. His jaw tightened, but he nodded. All right. After he left, I sat for a long time, staring at the faint tracks his boots left in the snow. My heart ached with the memory of the boy he'd been, the boy who had once called me his hero. Later that afternoon, Elaine called. Maggie, she said, her voice low, I did some digging. Diane's credit is maxed out. She's mortgaged her Houston property twice. And Camilla, there's chatter about her boutique failing. If they don't get more cash soon, they're in real trouble. The pieces clicked. Camilla hadn't just humiliated me out of arrogance, she was desperate, maybe even panicking. I thanked Elaine and hung up. That evening, I dug through my old records. Henry and I had always kept meticulous notes. Among them, I found something I'd almost forgotten, the trust documents. Though John was the beneficiary, I retained full control until my death. And Henry's signature was still there, faded but firm. A knock startled me. This time, it was Cal, the private investigator I'd called 2 days earlier on a hunch. He was tall, wearing a parka dusted with snow, his grey eyes sharp but kind. Margaret, he said, stepping inside, you were right to be suspicious. The Houston Shell Company? It's connected to a woman named Diane Hargrove. I crossed my arms. Camilla's mother. She's been involved in 2 prior fraud cases, Cal continued. Never charged, but always walks away with money. I think she's grooming Camilla to do the same. My stomach tightened. And my son is their target. Looks that way, Cal said. I'll dig deeper. After he left, I sat alone, the house suddenly feeling too big, too empty. Memories of John's childhood swirled in my mind, his first bike ride, the Christmas mornings he'd leap onto my bed with presents in hand, the nights he cried for his father. I'd given everything for him, and now I was watching him drown in a web spun by 2 women who smiled to my face while gutting us behind the scenes. I walked to the window. The night was still, the snow glittering under the porch light. Somewhere out there, Camilla and Diane were laughing, thinking I was just an old woman with hurt feelings. They were wrong. I was an old woman with power. If you thought Margaret's revenge ended with freezing the accounts, think again. The cracks in Camilla and Diane's perfect world are only beginning to show. Subscribe, like, and comment below if you're ready to see what Margaret uncovers in Chapter 4. You won't believe the secrets still hidden in the snow. When trust fractures, the cracks let secrets slip through. I thought Camilla's insult was the worst pain I'd feel that Christmas. But the whispers I was beginning to hear of fraud, shell companies, and betrayal stretching far deeper than family drama made her words seem like a paper cut compared to the wound beneath. Underscore 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 underscore. The next morning, the air was brittle with cold. Frost traced delicate patterns across my kitchen window as I poured coffee and reviewed the notes Cal had given me. Diane Hargrove, Camilla's perfectly coiffed mother, wasn't just a meddling mother-in-law. She was a predator who'd circled my family long before I'd realized. Elaine called again mid-morning, her voice hushed. Maggie, I shouldn't even be telling you this, but Diane's name keeps popping up. Small-time investors in Houston lost money in a consulting scam 2 years ago. Guess who their paperwork traces back to? Diane, I said flatly. Bingo. I jotted down the details. The pieces of the puzzle were taking shape, Diane's mounting debts, Camilla's boutique failing, and now a trail of shady deals. The Houston transfers weren't random, they were part of a pattern. The phone buzzed again. This time, It was a number I didn't recognize. I answered cautiously. "Mrs. Fields," a woman's voice asked. "Yes. My name's Jolene. I worked at Hargrove and Company, Diane's old firm." I don't know how much you know, but if your son's money went to her, it's gone. She's done this before. My father lost his retirement savings to her investment opportunities. She left town before anyone could sue." My heart clenched. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because people like her don't stop unless someone stops them," Jolene said. "And from what I've heard, you're not someone who backs down." After we hung up, I stared at the notepad in front of me, Diane's name circled 3 times. She'd smiled at my table, complimented my home, and pretended to adore John. All the while, she'd been weaving her web. That evening, Cal dropped by again, stomping snow from his boots. He set a folder on my table. "Got more for you," he said. "Your hunch was dead on." Inside the folder were photos: Diane entering a luxury car dealership, Camilla at an upscale boutique, and a copy of a wire transfer receipt. The recipient's name was an alias Cal had traced back to Diane. "They're laundering through multiple channels," he explained. "I even found a tentative agreement Diane made to sell a property she doesn't fully own. She's desperate." The room seemed to close in around me. "John's going to be ruined if this comes out," I said. "Unless you control the story," Cal replied. "People like Diane count on their victims staying quiet." I thought about Henry, how proud he'd been of our trucking business, how he'd made sure our deals were honest, even when temptation lurked. He'd built a name people trusted. And now that name was in danger. Later that night, I drove into town to clear my head. The streets were nearly empty, Christmas lights still twinkling faintly on porches. I parked outside a small diner and slid into a booth. The waitress, a friendly woman named Beth, poured me coffee. "Quiet night," she said. "Too quiet," I replied, managing a small smile. As I sipped the bitter coffee, a memory surfaced. John at 16, begging me to let him buy a used Camaro he couldn't afford. I'd said no, but Henry had pulled him aside, explaining that easy thrills often hid hard lessons. "A man's choices shape his future," Henry had said. Now, John's choices and his blind trust might cost him everything. By the time I got home, I'd made another decision. Camilla and Diane wanted to play high-stakes games with other people's money. Fine. But I wasn't going to let my son's life be collateral damage. The next day, I called Elaine. If someone wanted to leak evidence of financial fraud to the press, hypothetically, how would they do it without being traced? She hesitated. "You'd need a journalist with integrity. Someone who protects sources." "I might know just the person," I said. Elaine exhaled. "Maggie, be careful. If Diane suspects you, she'll come for you." I smiled grimly. She already did. Meanwhile, John left 2 voicemails, his voice growing increasingly frantic. "Mom, I know you're angry, but Camilla's saying you're trying to destroy us. Please, talk to me before you do something you'll regret." But I wasn't the one who should regret anything. That evening, as I locked up the farmhouse for the night, I noticed a car idling across the road. Its headlights flicked off as soon as I glanced out. My stomach tightened. Maybe Diane already suspected I was digging. I turned off my own lights, letting the house sink into darkness, and stood by the window watching the car disappear into the distance. Let her watch. Let her worry. The snow began to fall again, blanketing the world in deceptive beauty. To anyone passing by, my farmhouse looked quiet and unassuming. But inside, the groundwork for a reckoning was being laid. They'd taken my kindness for weakness. Now, they were going to learn that beneath the grandmotherly smiles and quiet Christmas traditions was a woman who had nothing left to lose and everything to protect. Did you expect Diane's schemes to run this deep? Things are about to get even more dangerous for Margaret. Subscribe, like, and drop a comment below about what you think her next move should be. Chapter 5 will pull the curtain back on Diane's game and Camilla's crumbling mask. Every fraud leaves footprints. Every mask eventually slips. By the time New Year's Eve rolled around, Diane and Camilla were dancing on thin ice, only they didn't realize how fast it was cracking beneath them. And I was the one tapping my foot to speed the break. Underscore 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 underscore. The town square was alive with celebration, strings of lights draped over lampposts, children throwing snowballs, and vendors selling hot cocoa to bundled-up families. But while others toasted to new beginnings, I watched from a distance, my heart weighed down with old wounds. Elaine met me near the gazebo, her breath visible in the cold night air. I spoke with a journalist friend, she said quietly. His name's Mark Trenton. Investigative reporter out of Chicago. He's taken down bigger sharks than Diane. Does he understand discretion? I asked. Like a priest in confession, she replied. We moved toward the darker side of the square, away from the music. I handed her a flash drive. This is everything Cal's dug up: fraudulent transfers, property deals, aliases. If Diane or Camilla sense we're coming, they'll bury it. Elaine nodded. He'll move fast. Meanwhile, across town, Camilla and Diane were at a glittering party hosted by one of Diane's old contacts. I knew because Cal, ever thorough, had slipped into the event posing as a photographer. Later, he sent me photos of them laughing, glasses raised, as if the walls weren't closing in. The next morning, I woke to another voicemail from John. His tone was strained, fearful. Mom, something's wrong. Camilla's panicking. She says someone's spreading lies about Diane's past. She wants to hire a lawyer, but we don't have the cash. Please, please tell me you didn't start this. I didn't answer. Not yet. He needed to feel the ground shift beneath him. Instead, I called Cal. How long before Diane realizes the leak? Not long, he said. She's probably scrambling already. My contact says Mark's story could run within 2 weeks if he verifies the evidence. 2 weeks. That was all I needed to make sure John saw the truth with his own eyes, not just in a headline. That afternoon, I stopped by John's house unannounced. Camilla opened the door, her perfect hair slightly undone, her expression tight. Margaret, she said, forcing a smile. What a surprise. Where's John? At work. She stepped aside reluctantly. Would you like some coffee? I stepped inside, scanning the lavish decorations, the expensive rug, the new chandelier items bought with money now frozen. No, thank you, I said. Her mask slipped just slightly as she crossed her arms. Whatever you're doing, you're going to regret it. I met her gaze evenly. The only thing I regret is not seeing through you sooner. Her eyes flashed. You're bitter because John finally has a life that doesn't revolve around you. No, I said softly, I'm furious because you're destroying his life while pretending to love him. She opened her mouth, but I turned and left before she could speak. The satisfaction of leaving her standing speechless in her immaculate living room was small, but it was something. That evening, I drove to Henry's grave. Snow dusted the headstone, and the world around me was quiet. I'm doing what you'd do, I whispered. Protecting our boy. I thought of the early years, how we'd scraped by after his trucking accident left me a young widow. I'd worked 2 jobs, taken side gigs, and gone without so John wouldn't have to. And now he was dangling on a wire Diane had strung. The next day, Cal reported back. Diane had begun quietly contacting her old associates, desperate for damage control. Camilla, meanwhile, was calling vendors and making excuses for late payments. Their polished facade was beginning to crumble. I decided to pay John another visit, this time at his office. He was sitting behind his desk, head in his hands. Mom, he said, looking up, Camilla says people are after her family. She's terrified. She's terrified because the truth is catching up, I replied. You don't know her like I do, he protested weakly. I know her better, I said. She charmed me, too. Remember? She used to bring me gifts, call me Mom. But people like Camilla and her mother don't build, John. They consume. And you're next on their list. His face fell, a flicker of doubt crossing his features. If you're wrong. I'm not. That night, The first whispers began to circulate on local social media, a post on a Houston finance forum, a tweet from a burner account hinting at Diane Hargrove's past scams. The cracks were spreading. 2 days later, Camilla showed up at my farmhouse. Her designer boots crunched in the snow as she approached, her expression frantic. "You're destroying us," she hissed before I even opened the door fully. "You did that yourself," I replied calmly. "You think John will forgive you when he finds out you went behind his back?" "I think," I said, stepping onto the porch, "that John will finally." As she drove off, I couldn't help but feel the first real tremor of victory. But it wasn't satisfaction, it was resolve. The fight wasn't over. It was only just beginning. Later that night, Elaine called. "Mark's prepping the article. He's verified 3 sources already. Diane's name is poison in certain circles. When this drops, she'll be finished." I leaned against the kitchen counter, staring at the flickering fireplace. "That won't save John's heart," I said quietly. "No," Elaine admitted. "But it'll save his future." The following morning, Cal updated me again. "Diane made an untraceable cash withdrawal," he reported. "She's spooked. She might bolt before the story hits." "She won't leave Camilla behind," I said. "Not yet. They need John to clean up their mess." And I was counting on that. By the weekend, whispers had become murmurs. A small local blog hinted at financial irregularities involving a Houston socialite. Diane responded by throwing a dinner party, her classic move to project control. Cal was there again, quietly taking photos of the guest list, which included a banker Diane had once stiffed. At home, I prepared for the inevitable, John showing up again, torn between loyalty and doubt. Sure enough, Sunday afternoon, his truck pulled into my driveway. He didn't even knock, just came inside, snow melting from his boots onto the rug Henry and I had bought decades ago. "Mom," he said, his voice cracking. "Camilla's not sleeping. Diane's on the phone all night. They're saying people are lying about them." I poured him coffee, letting the silence stretch. "Finally," I said, "people aren't lying, John. They're finally telling the truth." His hands trembled around the mug. Part of me thinks you're right. But part of me still wants to believe in the woman you married," I finished. He nodded miserably. "You're a good man, John. But being good doesn't mean being blind." He stared at the photos on the mantel, his high school graduation, our old dog Rusty, Henry holding him as a baby. "If this is all true." "When," I corrected gently. "When this is all true," he said slowly, "then I've been a fool." "You've been in love," I said. "That's not foolish. What's foolish is ignoring the truth once you see it." We spent hours talking about Henry, about the years I'd spent holding the business together after his death, about the trust Henry had left to protect John's future. By the time he left, I saw the doubt in his eyes had grown stronger than the denial. That night, the wind howled outside, rattling the windows like a warning. I wrote in my journal, as I had every night since Henry died. "Henry," I wrote, "we're so close to exposing them. I just hope John can forgive himself when the truth breaks him." The next day, Mark Trenton called me directly. "I've confirmed nearly everything," he said. "Diane's name is radioactive. I'm running the story in 10 days. If you've got anything else, now's the time." I hesitated. "I have access to her correspondence with Camilla. Financial planning documents. Emails where she coached Camilla to manipulate John." "Send them," he said. That evening, as I prepared the files, my phone buzzed again, this time, a message from an unknown number. "Stop now, or you'll regret it." My pulse quickened. I took a screenshot, then forwarded it to Cal. He replied within minutes, classic intimidation. "Don't engage." But the message only steeled my resolve. Diane was desperate enough to threaten me anonymously. That meant the ground beneath her was splintering fast. 2 days later, Elaine informed me that Diane's banker had quietly resigned, and a vendor Camilla owed had begun threatening legal action. The walls of their perfect little world were closing in. I sat by the window that night, watching the snow fall thick and heavy, coating the world in silence. For a fleeting moment, I almost pitied Camilla. Almost. But then I remembered her words, Christmas is not for you, you shameless woman. The sting of humiliation still burned. No, pity was a luxury they hadn't earned. New Year's fireworks cracked in the distance, bright colors painting the frozen sky. Somewhere in town, families were making resolutions, clinking glasses, and kissing under falling confetti. But here in my farmhouse, my resolution was already set. I wasn't just going to freeze their accounts or expose their fraud. I was going to make sure the world knew exactly who Diane Hargrove and Camilla really were. And when John finally saw their true faces, he wouldn't just walk away, he'd never look back. The stage is set, and the storm is about to break. Diane and Camilla's empire is crumbling, but Margaret's fight is far from over. Subscribe, like, and comment below with your predictions. How do you think John will react when the truth hits him square in the face? Don't miss next chapter, it's where the fireworks really explode. Betrayal doesn't always erupt in a single explosion, it splinters, crack by crack, until the whole foundation gives way. By the first week of January, the fractures in Diane and Camilla's world weren't just widening, they were gaping chasms. And my son was finally peering into the abyss they'd dug beneath him. Underscore 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 underscore. The snowstorm outside rattled the farmhouse windows, but inside, my phone was buzzing non-stop. Cal had texted at dawn, Diane's Houston banker just leaked a series of emails, proof of shell companies. Mark followed moments later, story locked. Publishing in 48 hours. 2 days. 2 days until the truth was splashed across headlines. I sipped my coffee, nerves taut as piano wires. John hadn't called since our last talk, but I knew he was struggling. His world was crumbling, he just didn't realize the avalanche had already begun. That afternoon, he appeared on my porch, his face pale and drawn. He didn't knock this time, just opened the door and stood there, snow melting from his boots onto the worn rug Henry used to love. "Mom," he said quietly, "Camilla's falling apart. She barely sleeps. Diane's been making calls all night, screaming at people I've never met. Something's happening, isn't it?" I set down my cup. "You're seeing it for yourself now." He dropped into a chair, burying his head in his hands. "If what you're saying is true, if she and Diane are fraudsters, then everything I've built is tied to them. My business. My marriage. My life." I sat across from him. "Your life isn't theirs to ruin, John. Not unless you let them." For a long moment, the only sound was the wind outside. Then his phone rang. He glanced at the screen and grimaced. It was Camilla. He ignored it. "I need proof," he whispered. "Hard proof. Or part of me will always wonder if I betrayed my wife." "You'll have it," I said. "Soon." Underscore 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 underscore. Meanwhile, across town, Diane Hargrove was unraveling. Cal had eyes everywhere, discreet sources at the boutique, old business contacts, even a server at the country club. From what he gathered, Diane had hosted an emergency brunch that morning, her manicured hands shaking as she told her friends it was all lies. But one by one, her allies began to distance themselves. Old whispers were resurfacing, unpaid debts, vanishing funds, ruined reputations. Camilla, for her part, was a mess. Cal's photos showed her pacing outside their boutique, phone pressed to her ear, tear streaks visible even through her heavy makeup. Her perfect veneer had cracked, and the world could see the fear beneath. Underscore 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 underscore. That evening, I gathered every document, wire transfers, trust papers, Cal's photos, and spread them across my kitchen table. John sat with me, staring at the evidence that painted his wife and mother-in-law as thieves. He traced a finger over a receipt that bore Diane's alias. "She used me," he said, his voice hollow. "She used us." "She did," I said softly. "And she counted on you being too in love to notice." He closed his eyes. "I married Camilla, thinking she was kind, grounded. She made me believe she cared about family." His voice caught. "She even said she wanted to start a family of our own." I reached for his hand. "Good people can be fooled. But the test of character is what you do when you're not fooled anymore." The fire popped in the hearth, and for the first time, I saw steel in John's eyes. He wasn't just hurt now, he was angry. Underscore 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 underscore. The next day, Cal called with an update. Diane tried to wire what's left of her funds offshore. The bank flagged it. "She's panicking." "Let her panic," I replied. That night, I parked my car down the street from John's house. The lights inside blazed against the snow. Through the window, I saw Camilla pacing, her phone clutched like a lifeline. Diane was there too, her lipstick smudged, her composure gone. They were like two actors forgetting their lines mid-performance. John arrived minutes later, his shoulders squared. I watched as he stepped inside. The shouting began almost immediately, muffled but unmistakable. Camilla's voice was high and sharp, Diane's low and cutting. Then John's voice boomed, louder than I'd ever heard, a single word carrying through the walls. "Enough." Silence followed. A minute later, Camilla's sobs broke the quiet. Diane's voice wavered as she tried to regain control. But John didn't flinch. I couldn't hear the words that followed, but I saw him point toward the door, toward Diane. The woman who had once smirked at me over Christmas dinner now looked small and desperate as she grabbed her coat. Diane stormed out first, her heels crunching on the icy driveway. Camilla followed moments later, mascara streaked across her cheeks. John remained inside, the house suddenly still. I didn't approach. This was his moment to see for himself what kind of people he'd trusted. But I felt a bittersweet surge of relief. The cracks weren't just widening anymore. The structure was collapsing. Back at my farmhouse, I sat by the fire, Henry's old photo in my lap. "It's starting," I whispered. "They're finally seeing the truth." The storm outside had calmed, the sky clear enough for stars to pierce the darkness. For the first time in weeks, I felt a fragile sense of peace. The reckoning was close, so close I could almost taste it. But as the embers glowed in the fireplace, I knew this wasn't the end. Diane wasn't finished yet, and Camilla still had cards to play. The final act was coming, and it would be louder, messier, and far more dangerous than anything before. The confrontation has begun, but Diane isn't the type to go quietly. Subscribe, like, and drop a comment below with your predictions. What desperate move do you think she'll make next? Chapter 7 will take this revenge story to a whole new level of chaos. Desperation makes people dangerous. Diane wasn't a woman who surrendered gracefully, and Camilla wasn't built to weather storms without cracking. Together, their unraveling was like watching a dam give way, slow fractures first, then a flood that could drown anyone standing too close. The morning after John's confrontation, the air felt heavier, as if the winter sky itself knew what was coming. I sat by the window with my coffee, scanning the news on my tablet. Mark Trenton's article was set to publish in 24 hours. My fingers trembled not with fear, but anticipation. The first sign of Diane's counterattack came through Elaine. "She's called in a high-profile lawyer," Elaine said over the phone. "And she's threatening to sue for defamation if anyone breathes her name." I gave a humorless laugh. Classic Diane, bully her way through the truth. But Diane wasn't stopping there. That afternoon, a mutual acquaintance from church called. Margaret, she said hesitantly, Diane's been telling people you're unstable, that you've been meddling in John's marriage because you're jealous of Camilla. I thanked her, then hung up. Diane was playing dirty, trying to poison the well before the truth could surface. But poison works best in the dark, and sunlight was on its way. Meanwhile, Camilla was cracking. Cal reported seeing her at the boutique, her perfect hair uncombed, hands shaking as she fumbled with her phone. He overheard fragments of her frantic conversation. Mom, this isn't working. He doesn't believe me anymore, and if this gets out, we're ruined. By evening, she drove to my farmhouse, headlights sweeping across the snowy yard. When I opened the door, she stood there in tears, mascara streaking down her face. Margaret, she sobbed, I don't know what to do. I raised an eyebrow. You could start with honesty. She stepped inside, her body trembling. I didn't want this. Mom said it was just a temporary transfer, that no one would get hurt. But now John, he's looking at me like I'm a stranger. You are a stranger, I said, my voice cold. The woman you pretended to be doesn't exist. She covered her face with her hands. I loved him. I still do. But Mom, she's always been persuasive. I didn't think she'd let it get this far. I studied her. For a flicker of a moment, I almost believed the remorse. But Diane's shadow loomed over every tear Camilla shed. Camilla, I said quietly, you have a choice. Either protect Diane and lose everything, or tell the truth and salvage what little dignity you have left. She stared at me, stunned. You'd destroy us all? I'd destroy the lies, I replied. While Camilla's walls were crumbling, Diane was in full war mode. According to Cal, she'd called 3 of her old contacts, begging for favors, one of them a journalist she once blackmailed. She'd even tried to bribe Mark Trenton to delay the article, offering him a cut of offshore funds. Mark, of course, refused and immediately called Elaine to confirm Diane's panic. By nightfall, Diane had shifted tactics again. She showed up uninvited at John's house, storming in like a hurricane. She's manipulating you. Diane snapped, her voice like shattered glass. Your mother's jealous of your marriage, she wants to control you. John, weary and pale, didn't shout. He simply held up one of the wire transfer receipts Cal had given him. Explain this, he said. Diane's lip curled. That's business. Investments don't always look clean on paper. John's jaw tightened. Or maybe you're just a thief. The color drained from Diane's face. For the first time, her mask slipped completely. You don't understand, she hissed. Everything I've done, every move, was to keep us afloat. Camilla's boutique was drowning. My name was on the line. I did what I had to. By stealing from me. Her voice cracked. By surviving. Camilla returned home shortly after Diane's outburst, her face blotchy from crying. John met her at the door, the receipt still in his hand. Did you know? He asked. She didn't answer at first, then whispered, I didn't want to. That single sentence spoke volumes. John turned away, shoulders slumped. I don't even know who you are anymore. Camilla reached for him, but he stepped back. For the first time, she looked truly lost, without Diane's confidence to lean on and without John's love to shield her. Back at my farmhouse, I stared at the flames in the fireplace, my chest tight. This wasn't joy, it was sorrow wrapped in justice. I hated that John had to hurt this much to finally see the truth. Cal texted me, she's cornered. Be ready for anything tomorrow. I replied, I've been ready since Christmas Eve. Outside, the snow was falling again, soft and quiet, belying the chaos waiting to break at sunrise. The world might still look serene, but I knew better. The next day would tear the last of their illusions apart. And for the first time in years, I felt Henry's presence beside me, steady, strong, and proud. Diane is cornered, Camilla's mask is slipping, and John's heartbreak is about to boil over. Subscribe, like, and drop a comment below with your predictions. What do you think Diane's next desperate move will be? Chapter 8 will bring the storm crashing down. By sunrise, the storm Diane had feared was no longer a whisper, it was a full-blown reckoning. Secrets have a way of clawing out of the shadows, and today, Hers were about to roar in broad daylight. The morning news was alive with chatter. Mark Trenton's article had gone live at 6 a.m., and by 6:30, Diane's name was trending. The headline was merciless: respected socialite tied to financial fraud and secret asset diversions. My phone buzzed non-stop with messages from neighbors, old friends, and even a distant cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. Elaine called first. "Margaret, it's out. Everything." He even included the Christmas incident, how she humiliated you. "People are furious on your behalf." I sipped my coffee calmly, but my heart was racing. "Then it begins," I said quietly. Elaine called first. "Margaret, it's out. Everything." He even included the Christmas incident, how she humiliated you. "People are furious on your behalf." I sipped my coffee calmly, but my heart was racing. "Then it begins," I said quietly. Diane's panic was immediate. She stormed into the boutique, the bell above the door jangling violently. Camilla was behind the counter, her eyes red from another sleepless night. "You," Diane hissed, slamming the newspaper onto the counter. "Did you open your mouth to that reporter?" Camilla flinched. "I didn't say anything." "You think I believe that?" Diane's voice cracked. "They've dragged my name through the mud, Camilla. Do you know what that means? The donors, the board members, they'll all turn on us." Tears welled in Camilla's eyes. Maybe they should. "Mom, this was wrong." For a moment, Diane stared at her daughter, stunned. Then her expression hardened into something cold and dangerous. "Don't you dare turn on me now. Without me, you'd be nothing. You'd be a bored housewife with a failing boutique and no influence." Camilla whispered, "Maybe that would have been better than this." Meanwhile, John sat in his office, scrolling through the article in disbelief. Trenton hadn't just exposed Diane's fraud, he'd laid out the entire scheme, connecting every wire transfer and offshore account. The part that stung the most wasn't the money, it was the realization of how completely he'd been manipulated. His assistant poked her head in. "Mr. Collins, reporters are in the lobby asking for a statement." John leaned back, staring at the ceiling. "No comment," he said flatly. But inside, a storm of anger and shame was building. By noon, the boutique was deserted, the phone ringing incessantly as customers and business partners demanded answers. Camilla finally turned off the lights and locked the doors. She drove aimlessly for a while before parking outside John's office building. For a long time, she just sat there, gripping the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white. Finally, she called me. Her voice was small, trembling. "Margaret. I don't know where else to go. Come over," I said. When she arrived at my farmhouse, she looked like a child again, makeup smudged, shoulders slumped. She sank onto the couch, staring at the floor. "I thought I was strong," she whispered. "I thought following Mom's lead would make me powerful. But it just made me cruel." I studied her for a long moment. "Cruelty isn't strength. It's weakness hiding behind arrogance." She swallowed hard. "Do you hate me?" I let out a slow breath. "I hate what you did. But hate isn't what's going to fix this. What matters is whether you're willing to make things right." At that same moment, Diane was on the phone with an old associate, begging for help. "They can't prove everything," she said desperately. "I still have leverage, those charity board records. If I go down, I'll take them all with me." But the associate, voice icy, replied, "You're toxic now, Diane. No one's risking their name for you." She slammed the phone down, her breath coming in shallow bursts. For the first time in years, she felt utterly powerless. That evening, John came to my farmhouse. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, his suit jacket wrinkled. "Mom," he said quietly, "I should have listened to you." I reached for his hand. "You needed to see it for yourself, John. That's the only way truth sticks." Camilla emerged from the kitchen, her eyes brimming. "John," she began, but he held up a hand. "I don't know if I can forgive you yet," he said, his voice tight. "But I need answers. Did you know about the offshore accounts?" She nodded miserably. "Not at first. But when I found out, I didn't stop her. I thought we'd get away with it." His jaw tightened. You were supposed to be my partner, not her accomplice. She broke into sobs, sinking into a chair. John turned away, his shoulders trembling. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the window panes. I watched them silently, knowing this was only the beginning of their reckoning. Revenge wasn't about destroying them, it was about forcing the truth into the open. And now, there was no going back. Cal texted me, she's still making calls. She's desperate. I typed back, let her thrash. Tomorrow, we finish this. The next morning would bring Diane's final desperate move, one that could either save her or bury her completely. But tonight, in my quiet farmhouse, I allowed myself a small smile. For the first time since Christmas Eve, I felt a flicker of peace. Justice had finally found its voice. The storm has broken, but Diane isn't finished yet. What desperate card do you think she'll play next? Subscribe, like, and leave a comment with your predictions. Chapter 9 will reveal the shocking move she makes to try and claw back her power. Cornered animals bite hardest, and Diane was no exception. With her reputation in shreds and the walls closing in, she wasn't about to go quietly. She had one final, desperate card to play, and it could burn us all if I wasn't careful. The morning after the article broke, the winter sun rose cold and brittle. I watched from my farmhouse window as the frost melted from the fields, feeling the stillness before another storm. My phone buzzed. Cal. She's moving, he said. Diane's on her way to the bank. She's trying to pull what's left of her assets before the feds freeze them. I exhaled slowly. She's panicking. Panicking people make mistakes, Cal replied. But be careful. She's not done swinging. At the boutique's abandoned parking lot, Diane sat in her car, fingers drumming on the steering wheel. The night had been long, calls ignored, doors slammed in her face. She'd been the queen of her social circle for decades, and now she was radioactive. But Diane wasn't a woman who knew how to accept defeat. She took a deep breath and dialed a number she'd sworn she'd never use again. On the second ring, a gravelly voice answered. Didn't think I'd hear from you, the man said. I need leverage, Diane whispered. You still have those photos? The ones from the charity gala? A low chuckle. That's dangerous ground. So is losing everything, she snapped. Meanwhile, Camilla paced in my living room like a caged bird. She'd stayed the night, her nerves frayed. John hadn't answered her calls since leaving the farmhouse. She's going to do something reckless, Camilla said, wringing her hands. I nodded grimly. She's desperate. But that's when people expose themselves the most. Camilla stopped pacing and looked at me, her eyes wide. What if she drags me down with her? What if she blames me to save herself? She might try, I admitted. But she has fewer friends now than she thinks. The truth is already out there. Camilla sank onto the couch, tears brimming. I was so stupid. I thought she could protect me. I thought we were untouchable. Untouchable is an illusion, I said softly. And illusions always shatter. By mid-morning, Diane's plan was in motion. She leaked a forged set of emails to a blogger, attempting to frame me for coercing Camilla into sabotaging John's finances. The blogger posted the story, and for a brief moment, social media lit up with the hashtag #manipulativemargaret. Cal called immediately. She's trying to flip the script. But its sloppy metadata on those emails doesn't match up. Let her try, I said. Every false move digs her hole deeper. Within an hour, Mark Trenton posted a rebuttal, exposing the forgery. Public opinion swung harder against Diane, and the hashtag quickly morphed into #DianeTheDeceiver. At John's office, he sat at his desk staring at his phone. His assistant entered cautiously. Sir, the board wants to know your next steps. They're worried about the boutique's investors. John rubbed his temples. Tell them we're auditing every account. And tell them I'll handle my mother-in-law. But when his assistant left, John slumped forward, gripping his head. The betrayal wasn't just financial, it was personal. That afternoon, Diane made her boldest move yet. She marched into a live community broadcast uninvited where John was scheduled to make a statement. The cameras were already rolling when she stormed the stage, her heels clicking like gunshots. Don't believe her lies, she shouted, pointing toward the cameras. This is all a setup. Margaret's been after me for years. Gasps rippled through the small audience. John stepped forward, his face pale. Diane, stop. But she didn't. She turned to the cameras, her voice shaking but loud. She hates me. She's jealous of Camilla, jealous of what we built. She's been manipulating everyone. I watched the live feed from my farmhouse, my jaw tight. Diane's theatrics were impressive, but desperation oozed from every word. Then something unexpected happened. Camilla stepped into the frame. Her voice was soft, but the microphone caught every syllable. Mom, stop. It's over. The room went silent. Diane turned, stunned. Camilla. Tears rolled down Camilla's cheeks as she looked into the cameras. I can't let you lie anymore. Margaret didn't do this, you did. And I helped you. The audience gasped. Reporters leaned forward eagerly. Diane's face twisted, fury flashing in her eyes. But before she could speak again, security escorted her off stage. Back at my farmhouse, I let out a shaky breath. It wasn't the final blow, but it was close. The world had just watched Diane's empire crumble in real time and watched Camilla choose truth over loyalty. My phone buzzed again. It was John. His voice was hoarse. Mom. I saw it. I don't even know what to say. Say nothing yet, I replied gently. This isn't finished. Not until every loose end is tied. That night, the news replayed the footage on every major network. Analysts debated Diane's breakdown, while social media exploded with memes mocking her live meltdown. The once untouchable Diane was now a cautionary tale. But I knew her well enough to know she wasn't done, not completely. Cornered, humiliated, and furious, Diane would be plotting even now. And the final chapter of her downfall was still to come. Diane has played her last desperate card on live TV, only to be betrayed by her own daughter. But is she truly finished? Subscribe, like, and comment with your theories. Chapter 10 will reveal whether Diane has one last trick up her sleeve or if this storm has finally broken for good. Some storms don't end with a crash, they fade into a chilling silence that's somehow worse. Diane had been humiliated on live television, but humiliation doesn't always stop a fighter. Sometimes, it ignites the kind of desperation that can make even the smartest person reckless. The morning after her meltdown, the world seemed to have moved on, but Diane hadn't. She spent the night in a motel on the edge of town, curtains drawn, phone switched off. She stared at the flickering TV screen replaying her outburst, her face a mask of fury and disbelief. She had been a queen in this town. And now, a punchline. The motel room smelled of stale cigarettes and cheap disinfectant. Diane's hands trembled as she opened her laptop, logging into an encrypted folder. There was still one final file she'd kept hidden even from Camilla, a ledger implicating several powerful donors who'd skimmed charity funds. If she went down, she could drag half the city's elite with her. But then her phone vibrated. A single text from an unknown number. Don't. The authorities already have copies. Trying to use this will bury you faster. Her chest tightened. Someone was already one step ahead, probably Cal or Mark. For the first time, Diane felt the walls truly closing in. Across town, Camilla sat in her empty boutique, the mannequins like silent witnesses to her downfall. She'd spent the morning reading hundreds of comments online, some sympathetic, others vicious. The guilt was eating her alive. She thought about John, about the trust she'd shattered. Her phone buzzed. It was John. She hesitated before answering. Camilla, his voice was low, tired. We need to talk. Her throat tightened. I'll come over. When she arrived at his apartment, he didn't invite her in. He stood in the doorway, arms crossed. I don't know if I can ever forgive you, he said. But I'm not going to let Diane destroy you to save herself. If she tries to pin this on you, I'll tell the truth. Tears filled her eyes. I don't deserve your kindness. You don't, he said flatly. But maybe you deserve a chance to make it right. Testify. Cooperate with the investigation. Cut ties with her completely. Camilla nodded, a quiet sob escaping her lips. Meanwhile, at the farmhouse, I sat with Cal and Elaine, going over the day's developments. Elaine had connections at the district attorney's office. The DA's preparing charges, she said. Wire fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy, the works. Diane's done. Don't underestimate her, Cal warned. Cornered snakes bite. I looked out the window at the falling snow. She's lost her stage. The only audience she has left is the law. Still, something gnawed at me, a lingering unease. That evening, Diane made her final attempt at leverage. She showed up uninvited at John's apartment, her designer coat wrinkled, her makeup smudged. John didn't hide his disgust when he opened the door. John, please, she began, her voice trembling. I can explain. No, he cut her off. You've done enough explaining. You don't understand, she pleaded. Those men, the donors, they'll destroy me if I don't act first. If you help me, I can protect you and Camilla. We can spin this. John's expression was stone. Protect us. You've ruined us. Get out. Her composure cracked. Don't do this to me. I'm not doing anything, he said. You did this to yourself. She stared at him for a long moment, then turned and stormed down the hall, her heels echoing like gunfire. The next morning, news broke that Diane had been arrested at the bank, trying to withdraw funds she'd hidden under a false identity. Cameras captured her being led away in handcuffs, her once perfect hair whipping in the winter wind. The footage played on every channel. Camilla watched from the boutique, her hands trembling. She felt no victory, only grief for the mother she'd lost to greed and ambition. John called me later. It's over, he said quietly. Almost, I corrected. The trial will drag this through the mud for months. But yes, her empire is ashes now. In the evening, Camilla came to my farmhouse. She stood awkwardly in the doorway, like a stranger unsure of her welcome. I don't expect forgiveness, she said. But I needed to tell you. I'm done with her games. I'll cooperate fully. And I'll work to pay back what I can. I studied her for a moment, then nodded. Words are easy. Actions will prove it. She swallowed hard and left. Later, as the fire crackled in the hearth, I allowed myself a small, weary smile. This wasn't triumph. It wasn't joy. It was something quieter, a sense of balance restored. Cal poured us each a glass of bourbon. You did it, he said. No, I replied. She did it to herself. I just made sure the truth had a voice. Elaine raised her glass. To truth, then. To truth, I echoed. Outside, the snow fell steadily, blanketing the scars of a bitter winter. The storm had broken, leaving behind the quiet aftermath. Diane's name was now synonymous with disgrace, her influence gone. But in the stillness, I felt Henry's presence again, warm and steady. And for the first time in a long time, I believed that Christmases to come might be peaceful again, without deception, without manipulation, and without the weight of Diane's shadow. The mighty Diane has fallen, but the emotional scars remain. What do you think the trial will bring, and can Camilla ever earn redemption? Subscribe, like, and comment with your thoughts. Chapter 11 will reveal the aftermath of Diane's arrest and the surprising paths each character takes next. Sometimes the real storm comes after the lightning fades. Diane's arrest had silenced the noise for a moment, but in that silence, new wounds were exposed, and choices had to be made. Justice was served, but healing would be another battle entirely. The courthouse steps were swarmed with reporters when Diane was released on bail. Flashbulbs popped as she was escorted to a waiting car, her wrists still bearing faint red marks from the handcuffs. The once flawless woman now looked like a ghost of herself, eyes hollow, lips pressed into a hard line. On the evening news, commentators debated her fate. Some called her a monster, a few suggested she was a scapegoat for a corrupt system. But most of the city just saw a fallen queen. I watched the coverage from my farmhouse, sipping tea by the fire. I didn't feel triumph. I felt tired. Justice was never as clean as it looked on paper. Camilla had gone quiet since the arrest. She didn't show up at the boutique, word was, she'd closed it indefinitely. John avoided public appearances except for work obligations. Even Elaine seemed subdued. The whole ordeal had drained everyone. One evening, John called. Mom, can you come over? When I arrived at his apartment, He was sitting at the kitchen table, papers scattered everywhere, letters from the DA, statements from the boutique's investors, even handwritten notes from Camilla. She wants to cooperate fully, he said, rubbing his temples. She's offered to testify against Diane and pay back what she can. That's the right thing, I said. He looked up at me, his eyes tired. I don't know if I can forgive her. You don't have to, not yet, I replied. Forgiveness isn't a gift for them, it's a release for you. But take your time. Meanwhile, Diane was plotting even as her world collapsed. From her lawyer's office, she made call after call, trying to salvage what little influence she had. But doors that had once opened easily now slammed shut. Her name was poison. That night, she sat alone in a rented apartment, staring at a framed photo of herself and Camilla at a charity gala. She touched the glass, her expression unreadable. For the first time, doubt crept in. Had all her scheming been worth it? But just as quickly, the doubt hardened into resolve. They won't bury me, she whispered to herself. Not yet. At church that Sunday, whispers followed me like shadows. Some offered sympathetic smiles, others avoided eye contact, unsure where to place their loyalties. After the service, Elaine and I lingered outside as snowflakes drifted lazily around us. You'd think people would understand by now, Elaine muttered. They understand enough, I said. They just don't want to admit they ever admired her. Elaine snorted. Admiration's easy. Accountability is harder. That afternoon, Camilla came to the farmhouse. She looked fragile but determined. I'm meeting with the DA tomorrow, she said. I'll tell them everything. Good, I replied simply. She hesitated. Margaret. I know I don't deserve it, but I'm asking anyway. Will you help me rebuild? Not for me, for John. He deserves some peace. I studied her face, searching for sincerity. Actions, Camilla. Show me you mean it. Then maybe. Tears welled in her eyes, but she nodded. The trial date loomed, and the city buzzed with anticipation. Diane's lawyer filed motion after motion to delay proceedings, but the DA pushed forward. More evidence surfaced, bank statements, forged documents, even a recording of Diane threatening a former associate. Mark Trenton's follow-up article painted an even uglier picture. Diane had manipulated multiple charities, using their good names to launder funds. Public outrage grew. Yet amid the chaos, there were quiet moments of reflection. One snowy evening, John came to the farmhouse. He stood by the fireplace, staring into the flames. I don't know who I am without all this, he admitted. For so long, I thought Camilla and Diane were my family's strength. Turns out they were its undoing. I touched his shoulder. You're stronger than you think. And you're not defined by their mistakes. He didn't answer, but the set of his jaw told me he was beginning to believe it. A week later, Camilla kept her promise. She stood in the DA's office, hands trembling as she signed her statement. She implicated Diane fully and admitted her own role in keeping the secret. It wouldn't erase the damage, but it was a start. Diane, however, responded with venom. Outside the courthouse, she sneered at reporters. My daughter's weak. She's turning on her own mother to save herself. None of this will stick. But her voice lacked its former conviction, and even the reporters seemed unconvinced. That night, I stood by my window, watching the snow fall. For the first time in months, the farmhouse felt peaceful. The storm was far from over, the trial would drag on, and scars would linger, but the worst was behind us. I whispered a quiet prayer of thanks to Henry's memory. Justice wasn't perfect, but it had found its way to us. The trial is set, loyalties are shifting, and Diane still refuses to admit defeat. Subscribe, like, and comment with your predictions. Will Diane double down in court or finally face the truth? Chapter 12 will take us inside the courtroom for the showdown everyone's been waiting for. The courtroom was a cathedral of consequence, every whisper echoed, every heartbeat felt amplified. Diane walked in wearing her finest coat, her chin high as though the cameras hadn't captured her in handcuffs just weeks ago. But behind her polished exterior, I saw the cracks. Today, her empire of lies would face judgment. Snow flurries danced outside the courthouse windows as the room filled with reporters, lawyers, and curious onlookers. The air hummed with tension. John sat beside me in the second row, his jaw tight. Camilla sat further down, wringing her hands, her face pale but resolute. When Diane entered, flashes popped from cameras like small explosions. She gave a thin smile to the crowd, an echo of the socialite she once was, but her eyes darted nervously toward the prosecution's table. The judge, a stern woman with silver hair, called the room to order. This court is now in session for the case of State versus Diane Caldwell. Her gavel struck, sharp as a gunshot. The prosecutor began with a damning opening statement. The defendant used her influence and her daughter's marriage to siphon hundreds of thousands of dollars from charitable organizations and private accounts. She manipulated family bonds, betrayed community trust, and even attempted to falsify evidence to cover her crimes. As the jury listened, Diane's smile stiffened. She glanced once toward Camilla, perhaps expecting silent support, but Camilla stared at the floor. The defense tried to spin a tale of misunderstanding. Mrs. Caldwell was misled by partners, pressured by circumstances beyond her control. She's a mother and a philanthropist, not a criminal. But even some of Diane's old friends in the gallery exchanged doubtful glances. The facade was cracking further. When Camilla was called to the stand, the courtroom held its breath. She stepped forward, clutching the Bible with trembling hands. Her voice wavered at first but steadied as she recounted Diane's schemes, the offshore accounts, the forged transfers, and the manipulation that began even before her marriage to John. She told me that Margaret wouldn't understand, Camilla said, tears rolling down her cheeks. That family was a weakness we could exploit. I didn't want to believe her, but I went along with it. And I'll regret it for the rest of my life. John's hands clenched into fists beside me. I rested a hand on his arm, reminding him to breathe. The prosecution presented evidence next: bank records with Diane's signatures, audio recordings of heated conversations with associates, and Mark Trenton's investigative reports. Each piece was another nail in her coffin. Then came a shocking revelation. A secret witness, one of Diane's former charity board members, testified that Diane had threatened to expose personal secrets if anyone questioned her financial moves. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Diane's mask slipped. For a fleeting moment, raw fury crossed her face. But she quickly smoothed it over, pretending composure. During a recess, reporters swarmed the hallway. Mrs. Caldwell, any comment? One shouted as Diane swept past without a word. Camilla, meanwhile, stayed in a quiet corner, whispering prayers under her breath. John approached her cautiously. "That was brave," he said. She nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "I owed you the truth." Back in the courtroom, Diane took the stand in her own defense, a gamble even her lawyer had hesitated over. She spoke with practiced elegance at first, portraying herself as a victim of circumstance. "I was protecting my daughter, my family," she said, her voice rich with feigned emotion. "The world is cruel to women who try to succeed. I made choices I regret, but I am not a criminal." The prosecutor stepped forward for cross-examination, his tone sharp. "Protecting your daughter? Or protecting your lifestyle?" Diane bristled. "That's not fair." "Fair," he cut in. "Was it fair to humiliate your son's mother on Christmas? Was it fair to siphon money meant for cancer research into offshore accounts?" A hush fell over the room. Diane opened her mouth but found no words. The silence spoke louder than any defense she could mount. By the end of the day, the prosecution had shredded Diane's narrative. The judge adjourned, setting the next session for final arguments. As the gavel struck, Diane rose stiffly, her face pale. Cameras caught her leaving, but the once confident glint in her eyes was gone. Outside, the crowd buzzed. Cal approached me on the courthouse steps, a rare smile tugging at his lips. "She's done," he said. "Not officially," I replied, but I felt the weight lifting. "But yes, she knows it's over." John exhaled, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. "I didn't think I'd live to see her cornered like that." Camilla joined us, her face streaked with tears. "Whatever happens now," she said quietly, "I'll testify again. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." For a moment, none of us spoke. Snowflakes swirled around us, soft and silent, the world somehow peaceful even as Diane's empire crumbled piece by piece. That night, back at my farmhouse, I lit a single candle and sat by the window. The flickering light cast long shadows across the room, but for the first time in years, those shadows didn't frighten me. Justice wasn't perfect, but today it had taken a step closer to the truth. And tomorrow, the final verdict would come. The courtroom has seen Diane's mask torn away, but the verdict is still to come. Subscribe, like, and comment with your predictions. Will the jury seal Diane's fate, or does she still have a hidden ally waiting to tip the scales? Chapter 13 will reveal the verdict and its ripple effects. The courtroom felt like a pressure cooker ready to explode. Every creak of a chair, every shuffled paper echoed like thunder. This was the moment, the verdict that would decide whether Diane's empire of deception would finally crumble for good. Snow had piled up overnight, blanketing the city in a deceptive calm. Inside the courthouse, the air was anything but calm. Reporters lined the back wall, pens poised like daggers. The jury filed in one by one, their faces unreadable. John sat beside me, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles turned white. Camilla sat 2 rows ahead, shoulders trembling beneath her wool coat. Even Mark Trenton, notebook in hand, seemed unusually still. The judge entered, her gavel striking like a heartbeat. Court is now in session. Jury, have you reached a verdict? The foreman, a middle-aged man with sharp features, stood. We have, Your Honor. The world seemed to hold its breath as he unfolded the paper. In the matter of State versus Diane Caldwell, on the charge of fraud, we find the defendant guilty. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Camilla buried her face in her hands. John exhaled sharply, as though he'd been holding his breath for months. On the charge of embezzlement, we find the defendant guilty. Diane didn't flinch, but her knuckles whitened as she gripped the defense table. And on the charge of conspiracy to commit financial crimes, we find the defendant guilty. The judge nodded solemnly. Sentencing will be scheduled for next month. The defendant is remanded into custody. Diane's lawyer placed a hand on her arm, but she jerked away. Her eyes darted toward the gallery, scanning for sympathy. She found none. Even her former social circle looked away, unwilling to meet her gaze. The bailiff stepped forward. As the handcuffs clicked around Diane's wrists, she finally broke her silence. This isn't over, she hissed under her breath. You think you've won, Margaret? You haven't. But the words sounded hollow now, less like a threat, more like a desperate denial. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed like fireworks. Reporters shouted questions. Margaret, how does it feel to see justice served? I paused on the steps, the cold air biting my cheeks. It's not about how I feel, I said quietly. It's about the truth finally being seen. Camilla approached, her eyes red but resolute. Thank you, she whispered. For standing your ground. For not letting her destroy everything. I nodded. You did the hard thing, Camilla. You told the truth. John stepped forward, pulling her into a tentative embrace. For the first time in months, I saw a flicker of hope in his eyes. That night, the farmhouse glowed with the soft light of a crackling fire. Elaine arrived with a bottle of wine, her grin wide. To justice, she toasted, pouring generous glasses. To healing, John added quietly, raising his glass. I sipped my wine, letting the warmth settle in my chest. The years of sacrifice, the heartbreak of Henry's death, the sting of being humiliated on Christmas, it all felt lighter tonight. But the victory was bittersweet. Later, as the others slept, I stood alone by the window, looking out over the snow-covered fields. The moon cast long shadows across the yard. Justice had been done, yes, but Diane's words still echoed in my mind. This isn't over. Could she still have allies? Hidden funds? A plan waiting to unfold? I pushed the thought aside. Tonight, I would allow myself peace. Tomorrow, I would be ready for anything. Meanwhile, miles away, Diane sat in a holding cell, her perfect composure finally cracking. She stared at the cold, grey walls and felt the weight of her choices pressing in. For the first time, there was no audience to charm, no scheme to spin. Only silence. Her mind raced, not with regret, but with calculation. Even in defeat, Diane Caldwell was planning. The next morning, Mark Trenton's headline blazed across the front page. Socialite Diane Caldwell found guilty, justice served at last. The article recounted the trial's twists and turns but ended with a line that stuck with me. In a world where appearances often hide rot beneath the surface, truth still has the power to cut through the darkness. At church that Sunday, people approached me with cautious smiles and quiet words of support. Some admitted they had doubted me before. Others simply said, "I'm sorry." I forgave them all silently. The fight had never been about their approval, it was about protecting the legacy Henry and I had built for John. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, John and Camilla came by for dinner. They sat across from each other at the table, a fragile but genuine connection beginning to form again. "We're going to counseling," Camilla said, her voice soft but steady. "We're going to fix this." John glanced at me, searching my face. I smiled. "It's a good start." We ate in quiet contentment, the farmhouse filled with the simple sounds of clinking cutlery and the crackle of the fire. For the first time in a long while, the future didn't feel like a battlefield. The verdict is in, but Diane's defiant words still linger. Could she be plotting one last move? Subscribe, like, and comment with your thoughts, because in Chapter 14, we'll see if Diane truly fades into obscurity, or if her shadow still stretches far beyond the bars of her cell. Prisons have walls to keep people in, but influence can slip through cracks you can't see. Diane Caldwell might have been locked away, but her shadow was still long enough to reach us. The first week after the verdict was deceptively quiet. Snow melted into muddy streets, the courthouse faded from the headlines, and life seemed to be finding its rhythm again. But I didn't trust the silence. One morning, Elaine stopped by with groceries. "Don't let your guard down yet," she warned as she handed me a bag of apples. "People like Diane don't accept defeat, they plot comebacks." "I know," I replied, setting the apples on the counter. "But I'm not afraid anymore." John and Camilla had been attending marriage counseling, a decision that surprised me. At Sunday dinner, they seemed more relaxed. Camilla helped set the table, her hands steadier than they'd been in months. Over the meal, John cleared his throat. "We've been talking about starting fresh. Not just for us, for you, too." I arched an eyebrow. "Starting fresh?" Camilla met my gaze, her voice firm. "We want to rebuild this family. No more secrets. No more lies." It was a fragile promise, but something in her tone suggested she meant it. Yet far away, in a grey-walled prison cell, Diane was scheming. She'd quickly become a queen bee among the inmates, trading favors, gathering information. A younger woman named Lila, convicted of fraud herself, approached Diane with a sly grin. "You're famous out there," Lila said, sliding a newspaper across the table in the prison cafeteria. "They say your daughter sold you out." Diane's lips curled into a thin smile. "Camilla's weak. But weakness can be useful." She had already made contact with an old business associate who still owed her a favor. A coded message had been smuggled out through a visitor: "Hold my shares. Quietly move the funds." Wait. Diane Caldwell wasn't done. Back at the farmhouse, I was restless. At night, I found myself checking the locks twice, then 3 times. A storm rolled in one evening, rattling the windows, and for a moment, I imagined Diane's cold voice on the wind. "This isn't over." Elaine noticed my unease. "You're safe now," she said, sipping tea beside me on the sofa. "Safe doesn't feel permanent," I admitted. 2 weeks after the sentencing, Mark Trenton published a follow-up article, "Caldwell Assets Under Investigation, Hidden Wealth Suspected." He speculated that millions were still unaccounted for. The DA confirmed they were tracing offshore accounts. John brought me a copy of the paper. "Do you think she left herself an escape route?" "Of course she did," I said grimly. "People like Diane never walk into a fight without a backup plan." Camilla's face went pale. "What if she tries to retaliate?" "She can't touch us from in there," John said, but his voice lacked conviction. Days later, I received an anonymous letter in the mail. Inside was a single sentence written in a familiar, elegant script. "Snow melts, Margaret. But shadows last." My stomach knotted. I didn't show it to John or Camilla, not yet. But I tucked it into a drawer, a reminder that Diane was still reaching for control. Life went on despite the threat hanging in the background. Camilla reopened her boutique under a new name, promising to repay what she owed to the community. John returned to work, pouring himself into new projects. One evening, the three of us decorated the farmhouse for spring. Camilla carefully hung a wreath on the front door. "I want this place to feel like home again," she said softly. "It already does," I replied, though my eyes flicked to the drawer where Diane's letter lay hidden. Meanwhile, inside prison walls, Diane received word through her associate. Funds had been successfully moved into an untraceable account. She smirked to herself. Even stripped of her title and reputation, she still had power. But what she didn't anticipate was that the DA's office had intercepted part of her message. A quiet investigation was already underway, and another indictment might be brewing. At church that Sunday, the pastor's sermon was about resilience. "Even when shadows linger," he said, "light has a way of breaking through." I closed my eyes, holding on to those words. Maybe Diane's letter was just a bluff, a way to claw back some control. Or maybe she still had claws sharp enough to cut. Either way, I was no longer the woman who walked away silently on Christmas Eve. That night, as the farmhouse settled into quiet, I stepped outside into the cool air. The fields stretched out under a silver moon, serene and endless. Somewhere out there, Diane was still scheming. But I felt a new strength inside me, a strength forged in betrayal and tempered in truth. If Diane wanted to play one last game, I would be ready. Diane's letter proves her shadow isn't gone yet. Will her hidden assets trigger one final twist, or has her reach finally ended? Subscribe, like, and comment with your theories. Chapter 15 will reveal whether Diane makes her move, or if Margaret takes control once and for all. The calm before a storm isn't always silent, it hums with unspoken tension. Diane Caldwell might have been behind bars, but her shadow had reached my doorstep. Tonight, I would discover whether she still had claws, or whether her empire had finally turned to dust. A week after the anonymous letter arrived, I received a call from Mark Trenton. His voice was tight with urgency. "Margaret, you need to hear this. The DA intercepted a transfer from one of Diane's shell accounts. They traced it to a brokerage firm in Miami. Someone's trying to move her remaining assets." "Someone?" I asked. "We think Diane still has an outside accomplice." I hung up, my mind racing. For months, Diane had underestimated me. Not anymore. That night, the farmhouse seemed too quiet. The grandfather clock ticked like a warning. I checked the locks again and pulled the letter from the drawer, reading the familiar script once more. "Snow melts, Margaret. But shadows last." Elaine arrived soon after, carrying a thermos of coffee. "Mark filled me in," she said, setting the thermos down. "What's your plan?" "My plan," I said, "is to end this on my terms." The next morning, I called the DA's office and Mark. Together, we arranged to feed Diane false information. A fabricated message suggesting a stash of unreported funds was vulnerable in a Denver account. We knew Diane would bite, pride wouldn't let her ignore it. By afternoon, the trap was set. From her prison payphone, Diane called her associate and instructed them to move on the Denver funds. Unbeknownst to her, the call was monitored, and the associate had already agreed to cooperate with authorities. That evening, a news alert flashed on my phone: Caldwell accomplice arrested in sting operation. John and Camilla arrived at the farmhouse that night, out of breath from the rush to get there. "She's finished," John said, relief flooding his voice. "The DA says this seals her fate, she's facing more charges now." Camilla's eyes shimmered with tears. "I can't believe she tried to keep fighting." "You can't change her," I said softly. "But you can choose to live differently." 2 days later, Diane requested a prison interview with a reporter, one last attempt to control her narrative. Mark volunteered to go. When he returned, he was pale. "She's broken," he said. But she still tried to spin it, said she was betrayed by everyone, claimed she's the victim. I nodded slowly. That's all she has left. Lies. Spring finally arrived in our corner of Colorado. The snow melted, leaving bright green shoots of grass in its place. I decided it was time to reclaim Christmas, not the holiday itself, but what it symbolized: family, generosity, and resilience. I hosted a small gathering at the farmhouse, inviting John, Camilla, Elaine, Mark, and even some neighbors who had once believed Diane's stories. As we decorated a simple fir tree months after the original Christmas disaster, Camilla placed a delicate glass ornament on a branch. She turned to me, voice trembling. "Margaret, I know I can't undo what I did, but I'll spend the rest of my life making it right." I studied her face and saw no pretense, just a woman humbled by her mistakes. I nodded. "Then start here. Start with honesty." Later, John pulled me aside on the porch. The night sky was clear, stars scattered like diamonds. "You could have walked away from all of this," he said quietly. "But you fought back. You saved us." "I didn't save you," I replied. "I reminded you of who you were before Diane's shadow fell on us." He wrapped his arms around me, a rare, lingering hug that reminded me of when he was a boy. Weeks later, Diane received her final sentence, 25 years without the possibility of early release. The courtroom was nearly empty this time, no reporters, no gawking public. Diane's influence had finally evaporated. As she was led away, she looked over her shoulder, her expression a mixture of rage and defeat. For a moment, I felt pity, not for her choices, but for the emptiness that had driven her to them. Months passed, and life quietly rebuilt itself. Camilla's boutique reopened under a new name, offering local artisans a place to thrive. John took on a mentorship role at his firm, determined to live by integrity rather than ambition. Elaine and I started volunteering together at a local shelter, something I'd always wanted to do but had put off while fighting Diane's battles. One warm evening, as the sun dipped low, I stood on my porch and watched the wind ripple through the fields. For the first time since Henry's death, I felt a sense of peace, not just relief, but hope. Christmas came again, almost a year after the night Camilla told me to get out. This time, the farmhouse glowed with light and laughter. John carved the turkey, Camilla poured cider, and Elaine led a clumsy but joyful carol. At one point, Camilla handed me a small, wrapped box. Inside was a silver locket with a photo of Henry on one side and John as a child on the other. On the back, it was engraved, "Family endures." Tears filled my eyes. "Thank you," I whispered. Camilla smiled faintly. No more shadows. And for the first time in a long, long time, I believed her. As the snow began to fall outside, I raised my glass. "To family," I said. "And to light, even after the darkest winter." Glasses clinked, and the farmhouse filled with warmth. The storm that had once torn us apart was finally over. Diane's reign has ended, but her story leaves a powerful reminder. Deceit may flourish for a season, but truth has roots that run deep. If you felt the justice, the suspense, and the triumph in this ending, subscribe, like, and comment, and share your thoughts on what you'd do if you were in Margaret's shoes.